Before we get started, Talk Music Talk has a newsletter, a weekly email featuring the current week's guests, plus what past guests are up to. Also, I'll tell you about shows I've attended and new music that I like. To sign up, head on over to talkmusictalk.com, click on the link, subscribe to newsletter, and you are all set. That's talkmusictalk.com. And now for today's episode. Hello there. Welcome to another episode of Talk Music Talk with Boice. I am Boice. This is my podcast. Thank you for checking it out. Talk Music Talk is a weekly music interview podcast where I have long-form conversations with people who are connected to music from different backgrounds and different genres, established and emerging. And on episode 128, I had the pleasure of talking to Jordan Rothlein. Jordan is from Red Bull Music Academy, RBMA for short. He's been there since 2016. He does production on their radio team and he works on shows, their techno and dance music shows, also their documentary style shows. Jordan is also a great writer. He has previously worked at Resident Advisor, which is an online electronic music magazine. He lived in Berlin for several years working there. Originally from Orlando, Florida, based in New York, Jordan is a great example of doing what you love, which for him is writing about music and listening to music, total immersion in the music culture, and it started with dance music. He talks about how he got into dance music, talks about DJing, his journey to Resident Advisor and RBMA, how his music tastes have shifted over the years. Also, he is going to tell us some of his favorite dance albums and lots more. This is a great conversation. I met Jordan at the Other Music Come Together Music Festival, which was at MoMA PS1 in Queens about a month or so ago. He was on a panel and I knew we would have a great conversation. It does not disappoint. Here it is, without further ado, my conversation with Jordan Rothlein on Talk Music Talk. Enjoy. You work in dance, pretty much entirely, almost, in the dance field?
In dance music.
Dance music.
Yes. That's my background, I guess you could say, professionally. That was my way in. Now, in my current job, I work a lot in dance, but also a lot in other styles of music, too.
Okay. So I'm curious that with dance music, when did you discover dance music?
Well, I think
Your
that
entry.
my entry to dance music, it's funny. I think I got into dance music before I knew that I was into dance music. Radiohead's, like Kid A was my favorite Radiohead album.
Okay.
And I think what I liked about it, and I only realized this much later, that came out when I was in ninth grade. I loved that electronic beat, and that kind of production aesthetic, that kind of chilly production aesthetic that you get across that record. And I loved Idiotech. I thought it was like the best song, the best thing that Radiohead had ever done, even though it sounded like nothing like Radiohead. And they have a lot of songs that came before that are maybe more sophisticated in a certain musical sense. But, I got so heavy into Kid A, and through that got into like Aphex Twin and Boards of Canada and even, Can, the German band, who weren't necessarily dance music themselves, but went on to influence a lot of dance music artists. And so like all through high school, when I was mostly listening to indie rock and stuff with guitars, all the while I was also listening to a lot of electronic music without really thinking about it, I guess. There was probably also, like a Global Underground Paul Oakenfold mix CD through there. And so, but
tucked away in the background.
Yeah. So then I went to college at NYU, and I was randomly placed with a roommate named Ranjan, who remains like my best friend to this day. We didn't know each other before college, and Ranjan was from Houston. he has a very musical background. And at that time, he was absolutely obsessed with techno. He was listening to a lot of Richie Hawtin. He was listening to more of the kind of experimental side of things, records that were coming out on like Compact. And he was playing it all through our, dorm stereo system. And a lot of it was just going over my head. Like, I liked it, but I couldn't get really deep into it in the way that he was into it. And I lived with him again my sophomore year. And by that point, my musical tastes had started to shift a little bit away from stuff just with guitars. I had gotten really into hip hop, and through hip hop, I got really into production. And I had started maybe kind of like taking a little browse through the dance music section at record stores when I would go in. And there was an album that I had remembered Ranjan talking about, which is Vocal City by Luomo. Fantastic record. Luomo is this house alias of Vladislav Delay. And it had just been, I think, reissued on CD, and I bought it because I was like, oh yeah, Ranjan talks about this all the time. And I listened to it, and I was like, this is amazing.
Okay. Like, that was your gateway?
Yeah. And so then Ranjan sat me down and said, all right, if you're into that, then I think you're finally ready for this other thing. And he started sort of explaining Richie Hawtin to me. And it kind of culminated in this very late night, like dorm room viewing of a bonus DVD that came with DE9 Closer to the Edit. I think it was. Dex Effects in 909 was this mix series that Richie Hawtin had done. Where he was really starting to get into deconstructing music, like not just mixing one record into another, but using various processes to actually create new compositions in the mix. And it was this video of, so this was the bonus DVD, and there was a video of Richie Hawtin playing at Time Warp, which is a huge festival in Mannheim, Germany. And it begins with this little, title card that says something like, this is like just a snippet of like some, 17-hour set that, we'll leave the rest of the set for the people who were there, but this is just, an hour of it or something. And it was Richie Hawtin up on stage with 3 turntables. He had a laptop, and he had a 909. And it was mostly just, shots of him playing for this crowd. So this was just before Richie Hawtin went full on, like, I'm not playing records anymore. Everything's like computer-based, machine-based. He was still playing vinyl, or at least that was still a big part of what he was doing. And it was like, I was just transfixed by watching this guy DJ. It was the first time that I really understood what was happening on stage when somebody is like playing music from turntables and mixing from one record to another, making adjustments on the mixer. Yeah, I thought it was the coolest thing ever. And by the end of that viewing, I was like ready to blow my savings on turntables and start buying records. And I went home that summer and I did that exact thing. And that was kind of it. I was 20, and that was the rest of my 20s was dance music.
Again, you got techniques for it?
Yes.
Okay. And
still have them.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
So did you like get help from anyone, like how to start DJing?
I did. As it happens, Ranjan's younger brother, who was 13, I think at the time, was also at the same time just starting to get introduced to electronic music through his older brother.
Okay.
His name is Nahal Ramchandani. He is actually like a pretty, well-known DJ in New York now. And another very good friend of mine. But Nahal had maybe started like 6 months before I had at DJing. And I remember like that summer after, between my sophomore and junior year of college, hitting him up and being like, hey, I'm ready to do this. Yeah. Like, I want to get into dance music. And I was like, what do I do? And he was basically like, well, get the 1200s and, get, you can get whatever mixer you want. Don't spend too much money. You don't know if you're going to like it or not. Buy records from Juno, and just, I can't tell you how to mix, just figure it out. And what I actually did was there was a mix CD that I quite liked that had a particular mix on it where it went from one record to another, and I had both of those records. And so I just I taught myself to beat match by just replicating that mix over and over again for like 2 weeks until I had figured out how to do it.
God, that's great, dude.
Yeah.
But you went to school for music technology, right?
I did, but after I went to NYU twice.
Okay.
I got a literature degree first. I studied English literature for my bachelor's, and then I went back. I think. I went back, I guess, about 3 years later to do their music tech program,
okay, got it.
Which was a master's program.
Okay, got it. So let's go back. How did you become like for literature?
I always liked writing, and English was my favorite subject in school, English and history.
Okay.
I loved to write, and it was just kind of natural to me that I would go and study that. I loved writing. I loved reading. And when I was at NYU for my first couple of years, I wrote for the Washington Square News on the music page, the culture page, I guess. And I'd write music reviews and do some interviews. And it hadn't really occurred to me yet that music journalism was like the path for me, that I should do that. But my two favorite things were always like writing and listening to music and playing music occasionally, but really it was like listening to music and writing about music.
Okay. And I'm sorry.
No, but so I think I never really wanted to study music, but I always just wanted to write, and I thought if I go to school and I study that's a skill I can take somewhere. You know.
Were you? Did you play any instruments or anything?
Yeah, I grew up playing a lot of instruments. Actually, I started piano lessons when I was 4, and played piano took lessons until I was 16. I also played saxophone in the school band. I played guitar a little bit. I was in chorus, so I was singing as well. The reason that I stopped playing piano, that I stopped taking piano lessons when I was 16 is because I was in a band and I was writing songs, and my parents said, well, you're doing plenty with music every week. If you don't want to take piano lessons anymore, you don't have to. Okay. So
were you glad for that?
Now I kind of wish I'd kept playing. But I loved I loved playing piano because that just, I don't know if you play any instruments or did you play piano? Or?
I played trombone.
Yeah. Well, so the great thing about piano is it's a whole way of thinking about music. I mean, it's like a representation it's just the scale, right? There's obviously a lot you can do in between all of those notes, but kind of the shorthand way of saying it is that the piano is just the way that music works. Okay. And I think since I started playing at such a young age, since before I could read, that just became like a very intrinsic way of thinking about music for me. I don't play piano enough now to be any good. I've definitely lost it, but I still think about scales that way. I still think about note relationships that way. When I was studying music tech, we had to take music theory class, and knowing piano was insanely helpful for that.
Because a lot of people don't even know any music theory going into that, did they?
No, but it's the program is a master's in music, and it's part of being a master's in music is that there's a music history and a music theory requirement. Okay. Those were two of my favorite parts of the program, to be honest with you. Yeah.
And what did your first band, what was that like?
Man, well, I talked about Radiohead earlier. Imagine a bunch of 16-year-olds whose ambitions are way crazier than their actual ability to follow through on any of it. We were like a garage band that thought we were like the next prog rock, art rock heroes or something like that. It was really fun. Honestly, playing in that band was maybe still would be just the most fun thing that I've ever done in my life.
Oh, really?
Great.
Okay. What was the name of the band?
We were called Franco.
Franco, okay.
Yeah, which was not a reference to any. There was a guy in our grade named Franco, and we just named the band after him because that was what we did.
Yeah.
You would do back then.
Did you play any shows?
We played a lot of shows, actually. I grew up in Orlando, Florida.
Okay.
And for like a year or two there, we would play fairly regularly. There were a couple of music venues downtown that would occasionally book us to open for people. We had a little bit of a following playing at like this anarchist bookstore on the edge of downtown. We played a lot of shows, and I think we all loved doing it. I think it was never going to be like a serious thing for us, but we had a great time while we were in that band.
Were you singing?
I was the singer and the keyboard player, and I played a little bit of rhythm guitar.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's great, dude.
Yeah.
And so how did you get from Florida to New York? Was that for school?
Yeah, it was for NYU.
Okay. And what was like growing up in Florida outside of the band?
It was hot.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess the relevant thing maybe about growing up in Florida was in Orlando or outside of Orlando where I lived, there was a really great record store called Park Ave CDs that, I had an older brother and sister who I would always, whenever they were going to the CD store, I always wanted to go with them.
Yeah.
And from a really young age, I was just obsessed with record stores and with buying music and with being involved in new music from sort of that side of things.
Okay.
So, when I was like in college, I worked there a couple of summers, actually as like a vinyl restoration tech. I was so excited to be working at Park Ave CDs. It was like a dream of mine since I was a kid. But yeah, when I think back on growing up in Florida, I don't really I don't know that there was anything that was so worth mentioning about it other than the fact that I spent a ton of time at the record store.
So vinyl restoration, what is that when incoming used vinyl comes in?
Yeah.
You take care of it?
Yeah, basically they had this machine that looked like a turntable, but it had a couple of different like arms on it that would extend over the record. And you would basically, it was like a vacuum sucker thing.
Okay.
So you would kind of like use a solution to get the record damp and kind of lift some stuff out. And then it would spin on this platter and this arm would suck all of the moisture out and all of the like gunk along with it.
Okay.
It was great. I think those machines probably run for over $1,000.
Oh, really? Okay.
I mean, they don't look like it, but they are pretty specialized gear or something. And you can take a record that's not physically damaged, but it's got a lot of crud on it and get it really, really good.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think I've seen people mention it on eBay because I have a vinyl addiction.
Oh, okay.
So you will see people mentioning this machine. So I think that's probably what it is.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I spent a couple summers just running that machine like all day for as often as they would have me in.
So were you thinking, I know you said about the writing, that's something to do. Were you thinking about having a music career?
Kind of to go back to that time when I was getting really excited about DJing. Just after that, I went to London for 5 months to study abroad for a semester. And, electronic music, especially at that time in London and in Europe, was something very different than it was here.
Yeah.
There was a very healthy club scene in London, places like Fabric. There was a very healthy dance music record store scene, places like Phonica, Black Market. And I went over, in August of, I think this was 2006, knowing full well that I was going to bring back a whole suitcase of records. And I did. I think my parents said they were like a little worried that I wasn't going to go to class. I was just going to only be at the record store. I went to class, but otherwise I was at the record store, Phonica mostly. And I came back with this huge number of 12 inches of records. And NYU has quite a famous college radio station, WNYU, and I sort of had it in my mind. I'd always wanted to have a record. I'd always wanted to have a radio show, but you have to be so specialized there.
Okay.
And I never felt before I came back at the end of that semester like I knew enough about one type of music to do a show.
Okay.
But I decided when I got back that I was going to start a radio show off the back of that record collection.
Okay.
And so I went in and I piloted the show, and I got the slot, and I started doing this show called Table Tennis. I think that was really when I started to get a little more serious about the idea that I needed to do something in music. After I graduated and I gave up the show, I kind of kept DJing and ended up starting a party with some people that I knew from WNYU who were also involved in dance music. Was playing, around the city like fairly often, I guess. Never huge gigs or anything like that, but I loved doing it. I was putting a lot of effort and energy at that time into DJing. And I was writing about music a little bit too. Like I had a blog, but nothing really serious. Yeah. I think when I decided I wanted to go back to study music tech, it was because I thought at that time what I wanted to do was studio work. I wanted to make music because I was so obsessed with electronic music. And if you're obsessed with electronic music, you're going to end up being obsessed with recording studios and making music that way. And when I was in school, I think I very quickly realized that it actually wasn't for me.
Okay.
I could do it, but it was so technical, and I couldn't quite wrap my head around why you would do things without asking like why you're doing them or have some aesthetic or conceptual concern behind it. I don't know. That's the literature degree talking, everything means something, right? And
it can have multiple meanings.
Yeah. And I think that program was very much about like, do the most technical, technologically advanced things with music that you can. And like, why would you still want to be playing records and stuff like that? Yeah. Unless you're trying to figure out like scientifically how they work or something. There was a lot of computer programming. I was really out of my comfort zone. And I think as a way to get back into my comfort zone during that period, I started doing a little bit of music writing. I had, through a friend, been introduced to a guy who ran a website I was reading all the time called Little White Earbuds. And the friend was doing a bit of writing for them, but he had to leave because he was going back to school, and he recommended me to come on and join the blog as like a staff writer. Okay. And so I started writing some music reviews. And sort of through that, I ended up getting the chance to write some music reviews for Resident Advisor. At the time, their editor was this guy, Todd L. Burns, who now I work with again at Red Bull Music Academy. And he sort of cold emailed me and was just like, do you want to come write for us? Like, do you want to contribute reviews? And I was like, yes, obviously.
Yeah.
And so the whole time that I was in school, sort of barely getting by, studying how to be a recording engineer, I was also doing music writing. And as I was going along in the program, it just sort of started to happen that I was getting nowhere with the audio engineering thing. I really wanted to be a mastering engineer. That was the thing I was most interested in ultimately. But there was no work in it.
Yeah.
But I was starting to get all of these offers to do music writing projects. And so I kind of got the chance right at the end of my coursework to go to Berlin and work for RA for 3 months. And I was just like, I'll figure out the school thing when I get back. And I never did, basically. The music writing thing just kind of took over. That was a pretty long-winded way of answering whatever your original question was, I think. But
something about music business, going into a music field.
I think that my desire to be involved in music on a professional level came before I had any idea how I was best placed to actually do that.
Okay.
And as it happens, I'm good in the studio. I know how to do everything, but and I can play music and I enjoy that a lot, but the thing that I think I'm actually pretty good at is writing about music and kind of getting into the heads of people who are making music and sort of explaining what they do to people who are maybe not as in it as they are.
Okay. How do you think you got to be able to do that?
I don't know. I think I tried it out and I liked it, and it was just something that I gravitated toward. I always loved the idea of interviewing people. I think I've watched like every episode of The Daily Show and was always obsessed with how Jon Stewart could talk to a person. And I was also really into like longer form interviews. Like, I always thought like the best job in the world would be to take over for Charlie Rose after he retires or something like that.
That's the king.
He is the king. And I think that I liked that, and I've maybe always been like a little bit of a sensitive person, and I just kind of always had a little bit of a knack for it, I guess. Yeah. And I also just thought it was fun. Writing a record review is sometimes really, really fun. You have to be careful that you don't use somebody else's music as a jumping off point for just having a blast as a writer, doing a bunch, something I learned the more I was writing at a professional level was it's not really about you. It's about the idea and how you communicate that to somebody. And you don't have to be fancy if you don't have to be fancy. You just have to get that idea across to someone in the best way possible. Maybe that's the fancy way, but maybe it's not. And I don't know. It just always made sense to me.
Yeah. I'm curious too, what was it about mastering that was interest you? I
mean, you get to sit in a room with perfect acoustics, listening to music all day. I loved the idea of like perfecting something in that way. And I liked the idea of listening objectively. It's impossible, obviously, to listen objectively, but to really use your ears to know exactly how to kind of round something out. One of the coolest experiences of my life was the exam. I'm using scare quotes here for the mastering course that I took at NYU. Was we did a master at home, but then we went to the professor's mastering studio and checked it, and you got to sit at the console. He's got this like crazy sound system that's like 10 feet away from you. And it's like this whole kind of looks like a firing range, and you're just sitting there, and all these things that you talked about in class, like, all these things that you talked about in class, like, 630 hertz, you're going to want to dip at 630 hertz or something. You actually heard that, and then you dipped and you were like, oh yeah, it went down. Like, it's so perfect. And you realize what an effect a room has on a recording. Like, it was just the most pure listening environment of all time. That's not to say like an unpure listening environment isn't amazing. I've encountered a lot of those, but it was cool. And I thought, wow, like, I love that. Like, that's the kind of critical listening I could do for a living. And
you realize too, that the masterings, that's the last, how important it is. That's the last thing before people hear it.
Yeah.
So you have a big job.
It's true. But yeah, it's also just, I think at the time that I was getting really interested in mastering, people in my program who were much more technically inclined than I am were already talking about automated mastering. A couple years later, a company called Lander came out with, automated mastering. Okay. And the truth is, for the way that we listen to a lot of music these days, like, maybe mastering isn't so important. Yeah. I like to think that it still is, but it's not like you're going to need, like, the world doesn't really need any more mastering engineers. Okay. at least not ones like me who were probably only kind of good at it.
I know we're listening through earbuds and computers and all that.
I know.
So what were you, okay, just for people who don't know, what is Resident Advisor like?
Resident Advisor is an electronic music magazine and sort of an events platform. Which is to say, like, if you are a promoter and you're putting on a night, you can put up like an event page for your party. Then you can sell tickets to it, which is how Resident Advisor makes its money.
Okay.
And but I worked on the editorial side of things. They have pretty reputable music magazine arm that is quite separate from the business side of what they do. And they write about everything from, big festival DJs like Dixon to pretty obscure electronic producers, talking about a mastering engineer. Like, people like Rashad Becker might get featured on Resident Advisor. While I was there, I did an interview with Mirzbao, like the Japanese noise artist. So the remit of the magazine was really broad, but basically the idea was like, if you are somebody who likes to go out to parties and you care a little bit about the music that's getting played there or a lot about the music that's getting played there, we cover that world.
Okay.
So that's
and are you
RA.
still there, or are you?
No, I left RA at the end of 2015.
Okay.
So I first started freelancing for them, I think, in 2010. I came on full-time kind of in 2012, I think officially at the beginning of 2013. And then I did 3 years there. I was the tech editor.
Okay. And when did you start with Red Bull?
I've been with RBMA.
RBMA.
Yeah, no, it's fine. Yeah, I've been with Red Bull Music Academy since the beginning of 2016.
And what do you do there?
I work on the radio team. Used to be RBMA Radio, now we're Red Bull Radio, but it's the same thing, run by the same people. Still an RBMA project. I'm using scare quotes. I'm a producer. At Red Bull Music Academy, nobody really has a job title.
Yeah.
It's one of our quirks as an organization, but we tend to have jobs, and mine is basically to make radio shows happen.
And what are some of the shows that you're working on?
I work on a lot of shows. I work sort of as a carryover from my work in electronic music with RA. I work on a number of techno and dance music related programs. I work with Brian Kasanick from The Bunker here in New York on a show that he does. I work with Honey Sound System out in San Francisco on a show. Interdimensional Transmissions, BMG and Erica out of Detroit. I work with them on a show as well. I work with a guy named Sean Ronaldo, who is also a full-time RBMA employee, on a new dance music show that he does that airs every week called First Floor. I work with lots of other artists on programs that they do. People like the Gaslamp Killer. I work with him on a program. I work with the Quantic on a radio show. I also work a bit on, and kind of increasingly, on documentary style shows.
Okay.
I do a show called Instrumental Instruments that is, it's kind of like a podcast style show, although we don't actually do any podcasts at this stage. But the idea is we take an instrument that's featured heavily in recorded music and we talk about how it became iconic.
Okay.
And trace the history and play a lot of the music that it's been featured in. So, for example, we did a show about the Fairlight, the sort of famous 80s sampler. Played a lot of 80s music. It was really fun. I work on a show as well called Counterintelligence, which is an hour-long documentary documentary is maybe strong, but it's an hour-long program about record stores. So each show is dedicated to one record store somewhere in the world. We have them put together a playlist of some music that's really important to the shop. They present that music, and then we interview them about the history of the store and kind of present the sound and the story of that record shop.
Okay, that's great, man. You host those, or you?
I host instrumental instruments. Okay. The other ones, it's behind the scenes, and every now and then I'll get on the mic at Red Bull Radio. But when Instrumental Instruments is not in season, and right now I'm working on writing season 2 of the show, I'm not usually on the mic.
How many seasons? I mean, how many shows were in the season? The first season?
We do the first season was just 3 shows. We were doing it as a test. The next season, I guess the first full season will be 8.
Okay.
So we do 8 shows in a season typically.
Okay.
But then we do a lot of our shows run on like a monthly rotation, so 12 shows a year. We've got a couple of shows that happen twice a month, and a handful of shows that happen once a week. And we now also have a show that happens every day.
Okay.
That's launching next week.
Okay. What's that called?
It's called Peak Time.
Peak Time. What is Peak Time going to be?
It really is going to depend on what's happening in the world of music on any given day. The idea is that it's like a kind of a daily music magazine style show.
Okay.
And interviews with big artists, dipping a little bit into the editorial projects that we do at RBMA, and kind of fleshing those out on the radio. But it's a new music show.
Yeah. It's exciting, man. Good. Are you still working on your own music, stuff, DJing, any of that? I
kind of stopped. So I lived in Berlin for 3 years, and I was still DJing a fair amount when I was there, but I was busy. I mean, I was helping to edit a magazine. Yeah. And I just wasn't really that interested in pushing so hard for gigs. I think, I hadn't like moved on, but one thing that happens when you are involved in electronic music is you sort of start seeing what like the life of a DJ is like and the way that you maybe build it up in your head. I don't know. Some people obviously still really want to do it, but I'd had this idea about it, when I was first watching these like Richie Hawtin videos that like, wow, you get to travel all over the world, play music for hours on end to people on gigantic sound systems. Your whole life it revolves around new music and buying records and all this stuff. That's the life. Yeah. That's what I want.
However,
and then you start spending, but then you start spending time around that DJ world. Yeah. And you're like, these people like never get a good night's sleep. Every night that they're out is like, it's just a regular work night for them. But for everybody else, like it's like the biggest party of the year. And they just want to go nuts. I saw a lot of people like having a hard time with it. And it didn't seem like as much fun as it seems when you're like a kid and you're a little removed from it. So I think I knew by the time I was in Berlin that I didn't want to do that for a living. I wasn't cut out for that. I didn't really want to push for getting a lot of gigs. Yeah. So it became just more of a hobby and something I would do with friends. Something that's really cool in Berlin. It happens everywhere, but this was a big part of my life in Berlin is like on a Friday night, you might not like go out. You'll just go over to someone's house and have a mix and like, grab a couple of beers at the Späti and hang out and play records for hours, and you're not DJing for anybody but each other. But it was fun. And honestly, especially maybe in the last year or two that I was living in Berlin, I was mostly buying records, like new dance vinyl, so that I could bring it to my friends' houses and play with them,
God, that's great. So where were you in Berlin for 3 years? When was that?
I went in 2012 and left in 2015.
Okay.
Yeah. And it was, a lot of people go to Berlin and they don't go with a job and they don't really have anything to do and they just kind of cruise for a long time. But I went specifically to do the RA job and left when I left RA. Okay. So the whole time I was there, I was there for work. It was like a ton of fun, but it wasn't like, I did have a job. I had to leave the club on Sunday night at a reasonable time so I could be at work on Monday morning,
And how does being in Berlin for 3 years, how does that shape you, change you from who you were?
Well, coming from New York, and having spent my entire adult life in New York up until that point, I think it made me a lot more laid back. Berlin just operates at a very different pace than New York does. It was also just a time in my life, maybe the only time in my life so far when truly my whole life just revolved around music. Weekend plans were which 10 parties am I going to go check out? All week I was in an office, like talking about music all day, playing music all day, writing about music all day. All of my friends were involved in one way or another in the music scene. So it was like total immersion. Yeah. And like, we got deep. I would like come back to visit my friends and like talk about stuff, and they would just be, like, man, you lost me. Like, I have no idea what you're talking about. But it was because I was talking about these DJs that are like niche everywhere except in Berlin, where they're like fucking huge.
Okay.
So yeah, I definitely, I was the most into music, I think, during that period of my life that I ever had been up until that point. And I was also living somewhere that was just quite a lot cheaper than New York and quite a lot more laid back than New York. I think it also happened that, I was I was actually older than a lot of other people that I knew in Berlin. I was like in my late 20s. A lot of the people I knew there were more like early to mid 20s. And I think that there was like a little bit of a maturity that came from that. And I also had like my first sort of like big boy job, you know, and, so I came away from that experience, I think, a lot more sure of myself and just feeling like music was the place for me in a professional sense.
Cool. And as your focus, is it still mainly like techno, that's sort of your area, or dance in general?
Well, something that maybe happened in the last year that I was at RA was I was just getting a little bit less excited about the direction that the music was going in. There wasn't a new sound that really spoke to me. There's always a new sound in electronic music, but the new sound at that time, which was, I think, very digital, very experimental, but not in like a pleasingly experimental way. It was just a sound that I wasn't massively on board with. I was also getting a lot more into music that just frankly wasn't club music. And when I took the job with RBMA, something I was really excited about was like, I was not going to have to know the top 50 dance music singles anymore. Like I could still know about them, but I could also spend time listening to other music, and I could get really into other sorts of things and maybe see what is like the new thing that I'm really excited about. And, obviously, like, I'm always going to be into dance music. I'm always going to love techno. I'm always going to love house music. But I think I needed a break from it, honestly, after that level of immersion that I had. So it was really weird. When I got back to New York at the end of 2015, I went through a period where I actually was not listening to very much music at all. Part of it was that I was getting settled again, and I had sold all of my, I'd sold my like music equipment. The stuff that I'd sold, my speakers and my hi-fi and all that stuff back. I'd left all that in Berlin. So I didn't really have like the apparatus for like listening to all my records yet. My turntables and stuff were in storage at my parents' house. It took me a while to get going on getting all that stuff back again. But I also honestly just needed a break, and I was getting sort of reacclimated to life here in New York. One of the first shows that I started producing when I came on at RBMA was a program called Discrete Music, which is an experimental music show hosted by this guy, Sam Hockley Smith. He's now the music editor at Vulture, a New York magazine. But he's like a freelance writer. He had done a lot of work with us over the years. And I was kind of tasked with helping to turn him into a radio host. And so he was doing a weekly show. He was just getting started on the piloting stuff when I came on. So I would go down to the studio and we would record his show. And I was so taken with the music that he was playing. It was a lot of ambient stuff. It was a lot of stuff that I always thought about as techno music, but he had kind of placed it in this experimental music context, which I thought was really cool. he was also playing stuff like John Fahey style fingerpick guitar records. And I was basically just like, I learned so much from this guy. And he kind of, definitely from hanging out at his show, kind of I sort of pivoted a little bit and started to kind of go down the wormhole that I was discovering producing that show. So it was sort of funny. It's like I went from just listening to only music with a very strong 4-to-the-floor beat to spending months listening to tons of music that had no beat whatsoever. And I can't help but think that the two things are related in a way. I don't know. My music taste now, I would just say, has gotten a little bit broader. And I'm listening to more ambient music and more classical music but continuing to listen to more electronic music, but I'm not gravitating so much towards the club stuff.
Okay.
And there's been some really amazing dance floor singles that have come out in the last year or so that I do get really excited about. But I kind of like that. I think when I was working at RA near the end, I kept having this feeling that was like, there would be those few songs I would like, but then I'd just be like, but this other stuff, I just don't connect with it in any way. And now I just get to listen to those couple of things and not worry about the stuff I don't connect with, you know?
Yeah. So I'm curious, your all-time, like, 1 or 2 favorite albums, like in the dance field. Yeah.
Well, I already mentioned Vocal City by Luomo.
Okay.
Which I guess, you know, it's an album. It was put together as an album. It was originally a series of 12 inches that came out on the Force Tracks label, I believe, in the late 90s, early 2000s. It's basically just perfectly produced, really gorgeous, kind of deep house music. But there's something kind of off about it. And that's definitely the Vladislav Delay thing coming in. Like, the lyrics are like inane to the extent that, you know, it's on purpose. It's like there's something. It's like kind of dumb, but in an awesome way. I mean, that was the one that really bit. You know, that one really had a huge effect on me, and I can still put it on, and I think it's an amazing record, like absolute classic. I would be really hard pressed to choose a favorite Gas album. Gas being Wolfgang Voigt. Okay. His ambient project, which I believe he described as the experience of like walking through the German forest, like while you're on LSD, and that's definitely the vibe. You know, it's very loopy, very hazy. Some of it has a beat, some of it doesn't. There are 4 or now 5 Gas albums. Pop is a really good one. Zauberberg is a really good one. It's basically just, to me, especially now that I've maybe pulled back from the club world a little bit, it's just magical music to me. I could listen to it over and over and over again. And it's funny talking about dance music albums. It's a little bit of a cliche to say, but there aren't. It's a singles driven game, and putting together a really good dance music album is tough. I don't know. There's just something about like a really killer dance floor single that is. There's something about a really killer dance floor single that like it's kind of all encompassing, and if you listen to an album as like a kind of self-contained listening experience, like a really great dance cut can be that. Yeah. You don't need everything else. I mean, I think often what'll happen is they'll kind of cobble together they'll cobble together a bunch of singles and then throw in the like weird down-tempo track. For me, I don't know. I've always in dance music been more of a singles guy, and also like I love mix CDs. And there've been some great mix CDs over the years that in a way are like kind of better than albums or something. Thinking about something like Ricardo Villalobos's Fabric 36 mix. I think it was Fabric 36, where it was just only his tracks that were like the exclusive like things that he and like one other DJ in the world had and would take around, and he just mixed all of those records. I mean, that's an album basically, and some incredible minimalist electronic music on that thing. You know, Alcachofa by Ricardo Villalobos is a great album too.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'm going to check those out.
You should.
I will.
You absolutely should.
So best place people can check out what RBMA is doing online?
RedBullMusicAcademy.com.
Okay.
That'll take you to everything. RedBullRadio.com is all the stuff that I'm working on. Our web magazine is daily.redbullmusicacademy.com. Really excellent long form music journalism.
Okay. We can see your stuff on there?
Yeah, I don't know when this is coming out, but I have the first piece of music journalism, like written music journalism, that I've done in a long time, coming out next week.
Okay,
through RBMA.
Okay,
so
excellent, dude.
Pretty excited about that.
Cool. Can you give us a hint? Or?
Yeah, the first feature that I wrote for Resident Advisor way back in 2012 was about a record store in Brooklyn called Dope Jams. Which, do you know Dope Jams?
No.
They ended up closing at the end of 2012, beginning of 2013, actually. But they were kind of it was like they were a record store, but then they ran all of these record labels. They had this very bizarre approach to like the aesthetics of a record store, to like just music in general. The guys that ran it were kind of known for being these cantankerous, like these personalities. They would write bad reviews of their own stock on their website. And they didn't make a lot of friends doing stuff like that, but they just they had their own way of doing things. And I had lived around the corner from the shop and had pitched an article on it to Todd at RA. And he was like, do it. Why don't you do that article? So I wrote that piece just before going to Berlin. And, it was like, my first kind of like serious music journalism endeavor. So the shop ended up closing after the piece came out. Hopefully that doesn't mean that the piece, I think the shop was always going to close.
Okay.
And
don't let Jordan write about your shop.
Don't let me write about your shop. And the shop then, oddly enough, moved to a town in upstate New York with like under 300 people living in it. And they changed the name from Dope Jams to Preserved Instincts. One of the original owners left the store. But they've always just been like toiling away up there. And we were like kind of quite curious what had happened.
Yeah.
So we'd been trying to do something with Paul Nickerson, the guy who still runs the shop, for a long time at RBMA. And I kind of got looped into an email a couple months ago between my editor and Paul that was kind of like, maybe we'll do a feature about you. And, Jordan, the guy who wrote about you the first time, like he's with us now, like maybe he could do it. And everybody agreed that it was kind of a good idea. And I was excited to get the opportunity to go upstate and finally see this record shop. So back in February, I drove upstate and did a second interview. Well, I hadn't interviewed this guy for the first feature.
Okay.
I interviewed the other guy. But I did my second interview about the shop, and we kind of talked about things that hadn't been written about in the original feature. So it's a little bit of a follow-up to my first piece. So it's kind of a cool way of getting back into music writing, I guess.
Nice, dude. Congrats.
Thank you.
Cool. Did I leave anything out?
Not that I can think of. Yeah.
Cool. This is great. Thank you for doing this.
Thanks for having me on.
Sure. And that was Jordan Rothlein from Red Bull Music Academy. I hope you enjoyed our conversation. Check out redbullmusicacademy.com for links to everything as he mentioned. And the article that he talked about on Preserved Instincts Dope Jams is out now. It is excellent. I read it, and so should you. So I will put the links in the show notes. I am online in several places, several ways. TalkMusicTalk.com for more information on this podcast. I have a personal website also, which is thisisboice.com, so you can check out the novels that I have written and also my music that I make. And if you are on Instagram, follow me there at thisisboice. Call to action for you. Download the Talk Music Talk app. You get every single episode. It is free for iPhone and Android, wherever you get your apps. Or you can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, TuneIn, and everywhere else. And if you are on iTunes, it is especially helpful to leave a rating and or review to help spread the word about Talk Music Talk. You can also find the podcast on SoundCloud at soundcloud.com/thisisboice, starting with episode 100 with Carlos D., the former bassist of Interpol, an exclusive interview talking about why he left the band. That's episode 100. Plus, also at that link, you can hear my music. That is soundcloud.com/thisisboice. And once you do all of that, or some of that, I have a back catalog suggestion for you. Episode 110 with Brandon Stossy. He is the editor-in-chief of the Creative Independent, which is Kickstarter's online interview site, which features plenty of music guests. 2 interviews in one with him. One focuses on his life personally and one professionally. That's episode 110 with Brandon Stossy. You will enjoy it. Thank you so much for listening. Till next time, and there will be a next time. This one's for you, Liz.